The cookies were shaped like rattles, the lemonade poured pink, the fairy lights strung high. It looked like celebration, until she called me the free babysitter. The crowd laughed. I didn't. In that moment, with the taste of metal on my tongue, I decided her joke would cost her more than she could ever pay. Before we start the story, tell me where you're tuning in from. The beautiful word, drop a comment, and don't forget to subscribe. It was a baby shower that could have been lifted straight from Pinterest. Pastel bunting, mason jars of pink lemonade, frosted cookies shaped like rattles. Brittany had insisted on the community hall in our Pennsylvania suburb, with rented gold Chiavari chairs and photo moments at every table. I had been there since sunrise, stringing fairy lights along the back wall, steaming the tablecloths Brittany forgot to pick up, and balancing a stepladder in heels because her Instagram stories couldn't show a crooked banner. My lower back ached, but I'd kept my lipstick fresh because in Brittany's world, image was currency. By late afternoon, the room was buzzing. Guests clutched paper cups, swapping birth stories and comparing diaper brands. Brittany tapped the microphone, her smile wide enough to flash in every iPhone photo. "I just want to thank my dream team," she began, running through names: the party planner, her college roommate who flew in from Florida, her mother, for teaching me everything about motherhood. I clapped along. I didn't care about credit. But then she turned to me. "And of course," she beamed, "our full-time unpaid help, Grandma." The laughter was instant, the kind that assumes everyone's in on the joke. I wasn't. I sipped my lemonade but didn't swallow, tasting only the metallic chill of ice. Brittany added, "Seriously, we're so lucky to have a built-in babysitter, huh?" From the corner of my eye, I saw Carlos, my son, give a quick, nervous chuckle. He met my gaze for a heartbeat, the apology hovering there, unspoken. I gave him nothing back but a tight, practiced smile. The speeches moved on. Diaper cake unveiled. Thank you gifts handed out. I stayed busy, refilling pitchers, swapping empty platters, hiding the fact that my hands had gone cold. When the last present was opened and the guests drifted out with party favors, I stacked chairs and hauled trash bags to the dumpster while Brittany and her friends cooed over matching nursing robes. She came over only when the hall was nearly empty, hugging me sideways. "Thanks, Linda. You're a lifesaver." "Oh, can you watch Maya next Friday? Carlos and I have that couple's massage voucher expiring. Not if you're free. Not would you mind. Just a casual booking of my life." I slipped on my coat. "We'll see," I said, my tone light enough to pass, but sharp enough to make Carlos glance up. He didn't ask. That night my house was too quiet. The faint scent of lemon cleaner still lingered from my morning mopping. I dropped my purse on the kitchen counter, toed off my shoes, and stood in the dark, the microwave clock casting a green glow over the room. I thought about the laughter. Not mean-spirited, but comfortable. Comfortable with the idea that my time was theirs. Comfortable with the idea that my life was theirs. I'd been a school administrator for 35 years. I knew about structure, about boundaries, about what happened when people took without asking. I walked into the living room, switched on the desk lamp, and pulled my reading glasses from the drawer. The laptop hummed awake, a blank document. The cursor blinked at me. At the top, I typed, "Babysitting services, Morales family." Below that, date, hours, rate, total due. I didn't fill in a single number, not yet. But the template sat there on the screen like a loaded chamber. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitor washing my face in cool light, and for the first time all day I smiled. Not the polite, party-ready smile Brittany expected, but the kind you give when you see the first piece of a plan snap into place. By Monday morning, the cupcake from the shower was still sitting under plastic wrap on my counter. I hadn't touched it. The frosting had sagged into a pale pink puddle, like it had given up on holding its shape, the way I'd been doing for months. I slid my phone out of my robe pocket and scrolled past Brittany's weekend posts, curated shots of diaper stacks and "Love My Tribe" captions, until I landed on a name I hadn't tapped in months: Deshaun Yates. Deshaun had been my friend for over 30 years. We'd met when I was a school administrator and he was the young, fast-talking lawyer defending a teacher in a contract dispute. Back then, he'd worn loud ties and had a laugh that could fill a cafeteria. Now, he ran his own firm and charged $300 an hour for his time, worth every penny. "Linda Morales," he answered, voice warm but edged with curiosity. "Either you're inviting me to brunch or you're in trouble." "Maybe both," I said, leaning against the kitchen counter. "What happens when family assumes unpaid labor?" "You mean like babysitting?" "Exactly like babysitting. Full-time, no agreement, no boundaries." He gave a short laugh. "Legally? Nothing, unless you start documenting it. Hours, dates, and your usual rate. Even if it's just a number you make up for now." I reached for the notebook by the phone. "And what about tenants? Guests? People living in your house without paying rent?" "Also nothing," he said, "unless you treat them as tenants and issue formal notices." "Why?" "Hypothetically? Let's just say I want to explore my options." There was a pause on the line. "Linda, are you telling me your son and his wife are living under your roof rent-free and treating you like the hired help?" "I'm telling you," I said evenly, "that my daughter-in-law stood in a room full of people on Saturday and called me the free babysitter." A low whistle. "Do you want me to draft something?" "Yes. A rental agreement and a babysitting contract." Something that looks official enough to get her attention. I could hear him flipping pages. "Done. Give me an hour." "Make it pretty," I added. "She likes things that look good in photos." While I waited, I tidied the house. Not because it needed it. My house was always neat. But because it kept me from replaying the sound of Brittany's voice at the shower. By the time Deshaun's email arrived, I had the dining table cleared and my coffee fresh. I opened the attachments. One document detailing babysitting terms, hourly rate, overtime pay, and late fees. The other, a rental agreement with security deposit, utility charges, and a reminder that the property owner could terminate tenancy at will. Both were printed on thick ivory paper, the kind that felt heavy in the hand. I smiled. The printer was still warm when my phone buzzed. Brittany. No greeting, no small talk. Just a text with an attached PDF. "Here's the sitter schedule for this week. Monday through Friday, 8 to 4. Carlos will drop her off after breakfast." I read it twice. Not a request. Not even a question mark. Just a schedule, as if I were already on payroll. Only without the payroll part. My finger hovered over the reply button, but I didn't type. Instead, I walked to the dining room, laid Deshaun's documents neatly in a folder, and slid them into my tote bag. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Every second felt like it was counting down to something. The morning after Brittany's texted sitter schedule, I set my alarm earlier than usual. If I was going to deliver my answer, it would be in person, over breakfast, where there'd be no mistaking my tone, no hiding behind emojis. The sun was barely up when I drove the short distance to the guest house, my guest house, where Carlos and Brittany had been living since just until we get on our feet. Turned into year 2. I could smell the burnt edge of toast before I even knocked. Carlos opened the door in his school polo, coffee in hand, eyes heavy. "Morning, Mom," he said, like he was expecting a casual drop-in. "Morning," I replied, stepping past him before he could invite me. Brittany was at the breakfast bar, scrolling her phone with one hand, spooning yogurt with the other. She glanced up, smiled that polite, painted-on smile, then went right back to her screen. Maya was in her bouncer nearby, cooing softly. I set my tote on the counter and pulled out the folder Deshawn had prepared. Thick ivory paper, neatly tabbed. I placed it between them like it was a tray of pastries. "What's this?" Carlos asked, reaching for it. "Babysitting agreement. Invoice for services rendered. Rental summary." I said it slowly, watching. Brittany's head lift from her phone. Carlos opened the first page, his brow furrowed. "Mom, what is this?" Before I could answer, Brittany plucked the folder from his hands and began reading aloud in a mocking sing-song. "Hourly rate, overtime fee, late pickup charge, security deposit?" She looked up, eyebrows high. "You're joking, right?" "No," I said simply, sliding into the stool across from her. "You called me a free babysitter. I'm adjusting to market demand." Carlos's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Brittany let out a short, sharp laugh. "Oh, this is rich. You think you can charge us? For watching your own granddaughter?" I held her gaze, letting the silence stretch. "I think I can put a price on my time. And if you don't like it, you can find another sitter. Or another roof." Her spoon clinked against the counter. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," I said. "Pay or pivot." Carlos rubbed the back of his neck, looking between us like a referee who just realized the game was way above his pay grade. "Mom, this is... come on. We're family. Family doesn't mean free," I said. "It means respect. And I'm giving you the chance to show it." Brittany flipped to the rental agreement, reading faster now. "Utilities? Maintenance fees? Are you trying to evict us?" "Not today," I said evenly. "But I like to be prepared." Her face flushed. "This is petty, Linda. I mean, I made a joke at my own baby shower and now you're..." "What? Sending us bills?" "You didn't make a joke," I said, standing now, palms on the counter. "You made a declaration. And I'm just making mine in writing." For a second, I thought she might fling the folder at me. Instead, she ripped the papers in half with quick, jagged tugs. The sound was sharp, tearing through the quiet kitchen. Carlos winced. I didn't flinch. I just reached back into my tote, pulled out an identical folder, and set it down in the exact same spot. "Good thing I brought copies," I said, my voice calm, almost cheerful. "This one's laminated." 3 mornings passed after the breakfast showdown, and the silence was almost suspicious. No texts, no calls, no mentions of contracts, rent, or hourly rates. So I did what they clearly thought I'd keep doing. I showed up when they dropped Maya off, I warmed bottles, I sang to her in the rocking chair, and every time the clock started, I made a note of it. At first, the spreadsheet felt like busy work, but with each row, date, start time, end time, total hours, I began to feel something sharp and satisfying. Proof. I'd learned in my years as an administrator that paper trails are more powerful than arguments. Carlos would stop by for pickups, his eyes sliding past mine like he was late for something. Brittany didn't show up at all. She was always in the middle of something or just ran out for a quick errand. That seemed to last exactly as long as her Instagram stories. Those stories were hard to miss. Blessed. #new mom life. Perfectly filtered pictures of her cradling Maya in a sunbeam. Pictures I knew had been taken after she dropped the baby at my house and spent the afternoon at the nail salon. But when Maya was with me, I made sure the only thing she felt was love. Her tiny fingers curled around mine as I read her goodnight moon for the 10th time that week. Her laugh bubbled out when I made the old wooden rocking chair creak back and forth. Even with the clock ticking beside me, she was never part of the calculation. She was the reason I was willing to keep score at all. On Thursday, I called Deshawn. "They haven't said a word," I told him. Not a text, not a question, just nothing. That's the thing about silence, he said. It's either avoidance or agreement. I'd treat it as the second, and then I'd send the first invoice. Certified mail. Certified? He chuckled. Let's make it official. No one can claim they didn't get it. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, Maya asleep in the bassinet by my feet. The spreadsheet totaled neatly 60 hours over 2 weeks. At $28 an hour, my chosen grandma's rate, the math landed at $1,680. I printed the invoice, the words crisp against the ivory paper. Under due date, I wrote, in pen, 10 days from receipt. For a moment, I imagined the scene when Brittany opened it. The slow comprehension, the flare of indignation, the frantic search for someone to tell her I was bluffing. But this time, there'd be no bluff. Friday morning, Brittany broke her silence, not to me, but to her followers. I saw it because Teresa sent me the screenshot. A selfie in oversized sunglasses captioned, "When your MIL thinks she's a nanny." Cute. Followed by a laughing emoji. Teresa texted under the screenshot. She really doesn't know who she's playing with. I didn't reply. I was too busy sealing the envelope. Inside, the printed invoice, a polite but firm cover letter, and a note in my neatest handwriting. Please remit payment promptly to avoid late fees. At the post office, the clerk slid the certified mail form across the counter. Sign here, she said. I pressed my pen to the paper and thought, this is how you stop being the free babysitter. The envelope disappeared into the outgoing bin, and I walked back into the Pennsylvania sunlight with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had just planted the first seed of a very deliberate garden. The first thing I heard when I stepped onto the back deck was Brittany's voice, bright and cutting. She's charging us for babysitting, she told someone on speakerphone, in her own house. Can you believe that? Her laugh rang sharp through the screen door. The smell of her over-sweetened iced coffee wafted into the cool morning air. I stood there a moment, listening to her friend's muffled response. Then I pushed the door open, slow and deliberate. Actually, I said, setting my grocery bag on the counter, it's my house. Brittany's head jerked up. She covered the phone with her hand. I know that, Linda. I was just making sure your friend knows too, I said lightly, unloading the milk. My smile didn't touch my eyes. That afternoon, after Maya's nap, I dug out the fireproof box from the hall closet. It was heavy with 30 years of paper, tax returns, insurance forms, and right on top, the folded crisp deed to my home. My name alone in black ink, paid off 5 years ago, mortgage-free, no co-owners, no legal claims. I laid it flat on the dining table like a trophy and called Deshawn. She's mocking me about charging for childcare, I said, and about the rent. Which, by the way, she doesn't pay. Deshawn's chuckle was low and dangerous. You want me to write something up? Maybe. Something official. Not because I want them out, yet, but because I want them aware. He understood instantly. We'll draft a 30-day move-out notice. Not to serve, just to have ready. And I'll add a clause about use of property, guest conduct, and contribution expectations. Good, I said. Make it airtight. The next morning, Teresa came over with a tray of lemon bars. She set them down, eyeing the papers spread across my table. That looks like trouble, she said, peeking at the bold letters. Notice to terminate tenancy. It's preparation, I corrected. I don't want them gone. I want them to understand they're not entitled to free lodging and free labor. Teresa snorted. Or both. I looked up. Both? Linda, you've been raising your granddaughter and housing her parents like it's your second career. You could retire from that anytime you want. Her words stayed with me after she left. I didn't know if I was ready for both, but I wanted the option. By Friday, the certified receipt for the babysitting invoice came back in the mail. Signed. No payment yet, but signed. Which meant they'd gotten it, read it, and chosen silence again. That evening, I stood in the kitchen with a sheet of thick cardstock and a black marker. I wrote in my neatest block letters, "All guests must contribute. Home is not a hotel." I laminated it, because laminated things last, and posted it dead center on the refrigerator door. The hum of the fridge was the only sound in the room as I stepped back and admired my work. Not angry, not subtle, just undeniable. I could already imagine Brittany's face when she saw it, coffee mug in hand, ready to scroll her morning feed. It was a Sunday morning, the kind where sunlight slants just right through the blinds and the coffee smells stronger than usual. I had just settled in with my first sip when my phone lit up with Teresa's text. "Did you know about this?" Attached were 3 screenshots from Instagram. The first, Maya in a frilly peach dress, seated on a blanket surrounded by pastries and pastel balloons. The second, Brittany holding her, beaming, with a caption that read, "Mommy and me brunch. Love my circle." The third, a group shot. Brittany's friends and their mothers, all laughing in coordinated floral dresses. No seat at the table for me. I scrolled through Brittany's story in silence. Maya was being passed from one set of manicured hands to another, her small face framed by oversized sunglasses that didn't belong to her. There was music in the background, clinking mimosas, the soft coo of strangers calling her sweet girl. A pit opened in my stomach. Not because I wasn't there, but because I hadn't even been told it was happening. At noon, my phone buzzed again. "Carlos. Didn't want you to feel obligated," his text read. No greeting, no explanation beyond that. I stared at the words. Obligated. As if seeing my granddaughter was a burden, as if they were sparing me, as if they hadn't spent the last 6 months assuming my time was theirs to schedule. I didn't reply. I simply opened my spreadsheet and added a new column, weekend rate. Then, in the cell, I typed the number, double my weekday rate. If they wanted my time on Saturdays and Sundays, it would cost them twice as much. The next day, while Maya napped in the bassinet, I began documenting more than hours, overnight stays, date, reason, duration, drop-off condition, fed or not, bathed or not, absences from parental care, the length of time they were out, whether they were reachable. I even started noting Brittany's public events, the brunch, the girls' night at the wine bar, the networking cocktail mixer. Every post was a timestamp. Every timestamp was evidence. By Thursday, the list had grown into something formidable. Neat columns, color-coded highlights. It looked like a school report, the kind no one wanted to be graded on. That night, I pulled the latest invoice template from my folder. Previous balance, $1,680. Late fee, 10%. $168. Additional hours, 22 hours at $28 per hour equals $616. Weekend premium, 6 hours at $56 per hour equals $336. Total due, $2,800. And at the bottom, in bold, future service contingent upon full payment of past balance. The wording made me smile. Contingent, formal, unmistakable. I printed 2 copies, one for the certified envelope and one for my personal records. The paper still smelled faintly of the warm toner as I slid it into its sleeve. By the time I sealed the flap, the house was quiet again. Just the hum of the fridge behind me and the steady tick of the wall clock. They could have invited me. They could have told me. Instead, they'd sent me a message. Now I was sending one back, in writing. The brunch had been a line in the sand. They'd drawn it without saying a word, but I could see it just as clearly as the bold type on my invoices. So that Monday, instead of waiting for another slight, I reached for my phone and scrolled down to a name I hadn't called in far too long. Teresa Nguyen answered on the second ring, her voice warm and quick like always. Linda Morales, either you need a ride to the airport or someone's pissed you off. I let out a short laugh. Door number 2. Where do I start? Start with a pot of coffee, I said. I'm coming over. Teresa lived 2 streets over in a tidy brick ranch that always smelled faintly of cinnamon and Murphy's oil soap. She opened the door before I knocked, ushering me inside like I'd just come home from war. In her kitchen, she poured coffee into mismatched mugs and slid one across the table to me. Okay. Spill. I told her about the baby shower joke, the sitter schedule text, the brunch they hadn't even mentioned. I pulled the invoice copies from my tote and laid them on her table like evidence in a trial. She flipped through each page, eyes widening, then narrowing. You raised a man, not a mouthpiece, she muttered. I arched a brow. Meaning? Meaning Carlos should have stepped in before you even had to print these. We both laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was either that or start yelling into the walls. Teresa leaned back in her chair, tapping one neatly painted nail against the invoice. You know what would make this even better? Don't tempt me. Print one more. For rent, I blinked. You mean... I mean you've been housing them for free in a fully paid-off property. That's at least $1,200 a month in this neighborhood. And if she thinks babysitting invoices make you a nanny, then maybe rent invoices will make you a landlord. That night, I sat at my desk and pulled up the rental agreement Deshawn had drafted weeks ago. I adjusted the monthly rent to $1,200, added a clause about late fees, and printed 2 copies. The weight of the paper in my hands felt different this time, heavier, sharper. The next morning, I walked into the guest house without knocking. Carlos was at work. Brittany was perched on the couch scrolling her phone. Maya was on the floor in a little play gym, batting at plastic animals. I set the rental agreement on the coffee table. Read it, I said. Brittany didn't touch it. What is this? Formal rental agreement. $1,200 a month. Due on the 1st. Late fee applies after the 5th. Her head jerked up. You're charging us rent now? You've been living here rent-free for over a year. Consider this an adjustment to market demand. Her voice rose instantly. This is harassment. No, I said, keeping my tone even. This is property management. She stood, hands on her hips. Carlos is going to hear about this. I'm sure he will, I replied, picking up a stray pacifier from the floor and setting it on the coffee table beside the agreement. And when he does, tell him the terms are firm. Her cheeks flushed a deep pink. You're unbelievable. Thank you, I said, turning toward the door. Behind me, Maya let out a happy squeal, utterly unaware that her mother and grandmother were engaged in a cold war with no clear winner yet. But I had something Brittany didn't. Patience, paperwork, and the deed to the building we were standing in. The rental agreement had been sitting on their coffee table for 3 days before Carlos showed up at my kitchen door. He didn't knock, just stepped inside with his school lanyard still around his neck, his expression somewhere between tired and pleading. Mom, he began, sinking into a chair. Can we just let this go? I set my mug down. Which part? The babysitting invoices? The rent? The part where your wife calls me the free help in front of 50 people? His jaw tightened. You're making things worse. She's upset. Upset costs nothing, I said, reaching for the folder on the counter. Childcare does. I slid it across to him. Spreadsheets of hours logged, rates calculated, dates highlighted. Another sheet detailed overnights, drop-off conditions, and absences. The paper smelled faintly of toner and lemon from the countertop cleaner. He glanced at the numbers. You kept records? Of course. I learned a long time ago that memory fades, but paper doesn't. The next morning, Teresa sent me another screenshot. Brittany, grinning into her phone camera, a caption across the bottom. When your MIL thinks she's HR, followed by a crying, laughing emoji. In the background, Maya was in her high chair, banging a spoon against the tray. I didn't reply to Teresa. I simply printed the screenshot, 3 copies, and slipped one into my growing legal response folder. If Brittany wanted to turn my boundaries into punchlines, I'd keep them as exhibits. Later that week, I was feeding Maya applesauce when she babbled something that made me pause. Nana, she said, reaching for my hand. The word was round and perfect in her tiny mouth. My heart swelled, but before I could answer, Brittany walked in from the hallway. No, sweetie, she said in that syrupy, performative tone she used for social media. It's Grandma. Say Grandma. Maya just blinked, her hand still in mine. Brittany's eyes flicked to me. We don't want her confused. I smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. She's not confused. That night, after the house was quiet, I opened my laptop and pulled up my estate documents. My lawyer had prepared them years ago, and I'd barely touched them since Carlos married. But now, the cursor blinked beside a section labeled Distribution of Assets. I changed one number, Maya's share from 40% to 60%, and Brittany's from a modest percentage to 0. Under Notes, I added, Brittany Morales to have no authority, management, or claim over Maya's inheritance. The printer hummed as the updated pages slid out. I signed them with my favorite fountain pen, the one Carlos had given me for my retirement. The ink gleamed wet and final. 2 days later, Carlos came by to pick up some tools from the garage. As he passed the dining table, his eyes fell on the open folder with the updated will. I watched from the doorway as he scanned the page. His face didn't change, no shock, no protest, just a slow inhale, then an exhale. He closed the folder, set it exactly where he'd found it, and walked out without saying a word. It was nearly midnight when the bass hit the walls hard enough to rattle the picture frames in my bedroom. Laughter followed, loud, overlapping, and far too close for me to ignore. I slipped on my robe and stepped into the hallway. The faint smell of perfume mixed with something fruitier, sangria, maybe, drifted through the air. From the guest house, light spilled across the backyard, flickering with the shadows of half a dozen women. High heels clattered against my hardwood floors. My hardwood floors. I stood at the edge of the kitchen, unseen, listening. Brittany's voice rang out above the chatter. More wine! Who's up for another round? It wasn't worth a scene that night. I turned off the hallway light and went back to bed. But sleep never came. The laughter didn't fade until well past 2. The next morning, I walked into the guest house with my spare key. The smell hit me first. Sour wine and something stale, clinging to the air like an unwanted guest. In the middle of the living room, the cream-colored carpet had a sprawling crimson stain, like someone had tried blotting it but gave up halfway through. A toppled wine glass lay nearby, sticky against the fibers. I didn't touch it. I just took out my phone and snapped 3 photos from different angles, making sure the morning light caught the worst of it. Then I opened my rental agreement from the folder in my tote. Clause 8. Tenant is responsible for damage to property beyond normal wear and tear. Cleaning and repair costs will be invoiced. By noon, the invoice was drafted. $300, professional carpet cleaning fee. Payment due within 10 days. That evening, I emailed it to both Carlos and Brittany. I was still at my desk when my phone buzzed, a text notification from an unknown group chat. My thumb hovered over the screen. Inside was a screenshot of my invoice, followed by Brittany's message. She's insane. $300 for a little spill? Someone get me a GoFundMe. Then a string of laughing emojis. Only she'd accidentally added me to the group. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. Then I hit save on the thread and printed it out. 3 copies. One went straight into my legal response folder. The next morning, I walked over to the guest house. Brittany opened the door halfway, one hand on the frame. "What now?" she asked. I held up a sealed envelope. "This," I said, "is the formal version of your next notice." She frowned. "What notice?" I didn't answer. I just handed it over. The heavy paper made a soft thump in her palm. Back in my kitchen, I made myself tea and waited. It didn't take long. Through the window, I saw her storm out to the back porch, phone in hand. She paced, gesturing, her voice carrying just enough for me to catch fragments. "Unbelievable. She can't. Carlos, fix this." I knew he couldn't, because inside that envelope was a 30-day notice to vacate. Legally drafted, properly dated, and fully enforceable. By late afternoon, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was from Teresa. "Check her feed," the message read. I opened Instagram. The latest post was just one word in bold white text on a black background: evicted. Carlos showed up at my door on a gray Wednesday evening, the air thick with the smell of impending rain. His hair was mussed, his shirt wrinkled like he'd been pulling at the collar all day. He didn't step inside right away, just stood there, his hands jammed into his pockets. "You're breaking up the family, Mom," he said, his voice low but taut. I didn't flinch. "Come in." We sat at the kitchen table. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. I reached under the table and brought out the thick photo album that had been resting on the chair beside me. Its cover was worn, the leather softened from years of handling. I opened it to the first page, a newborn Carlos swaddled in a blue blanket, my tired smile above him. Page after page followed. His first steps in the backyard, his high school graduation, the day he and Brittany moved into the guest house. I turned the page again, this time to Maya. Her tiny fist wrapped around my finger in the hospital. Her first nap in the rocking chair. Her gummy smile at 3 months. All moments Brittany hadn't been there for. "I raised you," I said quietly, sliding the book toward him. "I raised her. And now she's raising hell." Carlos didn't meet my eyes. He kept flipping the pages, his thumb brushing over the plastic sleeves. "She's stressed," he said finally. "We both are." "Stress doesn't justify slavery," I said. The word landed heavier than I expected, but I didn't take it back. He looked up then, his expression caught between hurt and defense. "It's not slavery. It's work without pay, without thanks, without choice." I cut in. "If your wife wants to treat me like staff, then she can follow staff policies." The rain started then, soft at first, tapping against the kitchen window. It filled the pause between us. "I'm not asking for miracles, Carlos," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Just for respect. Pay what's owed, apologize, and move out with dignity. You've got 30 days. Use them well." His mouth tightened. "She won't go for that." "She doesn't have to go for it," I said. "She just has to follow it. The clock's already ticking." For a moment, I thought he might argue, might try one last emotional appeal. Instead, he stood, closing the album carefully before pushing it back across the table. His eyes flicked toward the door. "I'll talk to her." 2 hours later, Teresa sent me the screenshot. Brittany's latest post. White text on a pastel background. Font deliberately soft to match the influencer aesthetic. "Toxic in-laws are a form of abuse." Below it, a heart emoji. I didn't comment, didn't share, didn't even save the image, But I knew the post wasn't for her followers, it was for me. After Britney's pastel proclamation about toxic in-laws, I expected the tide to turn against me. I braced for whispers at the grocery store, for neighbors to look away when I waved. But something stranger happened. Nothing. No one called. No one messaged. And then, one quiet afternoon, Teresa slid into the chair across from me at our usual coffee shop, a mischievous grin on her face. "I found your people," she said, flipping her phone toward me. On the screen was a Facebook group, Grandmothers Who Set Boundaries. Thousands of members, all with profile pictures of silver hair and warm smiles. The description read like an anthem. Because love doesn't mean servitude. I joined on a whim that night. Within an hour, I was scrolling through posts that felt like they'd been lifted from my own life. Stories of women blindsided by entitlement, guilt-tripped into unpaid childcare, pressured to hand over time and homes without thanks. Every story different, yet painfully familiar. When I shared mine, no names, just my daughter-in-law and my son, the comments poured in. "Yes, Queen. Boundaries. Stand your ground." Mine tried to move in without asking, "Remind her. Your home. Your rules." The next morning, one of the group moderators messaged me. "Would you be willing to speak with a parenting blogger? She's doing a piece on what she calls unpaid grandma syndrome." I hesitated. Public attention wasn't my style, but the blogger offered anonymity. No photos, no identifying details. Just the story, as I'd lived it. We spoke for an hour over the phone. I told her about the shower joke, the sitter schedule text, the rent-free living, the invoices. She listened without interrupting, just the occasional low hum that told me she understood. A week later, the article went live. The title was bold. "When Love Becomes Labor. Grandmothers on the Front Line of Unpaid Care." I figured it might get a few shares in niche corners of the internet. Instead, it exploded. Within 2 days, it was everywhere, reposted on Facebook, dissected on Reddit, shared in mom forums, even quoted in an op-ed about the value of unpaid labor. My inbox, thanks to the group's private messaging, filled with hundreds of notes. "Thank you for saying what I couldn't. I thought I was just being petty. Now I know I was being used. You gave me the courage to tell my daughter no." Teresa called the day it hit the local news. "Turns out ghosts don't go viral," she teased. "But grandmas? Grandmas do." I laughed for the first time in weeks. A real laugh, not the clipped kind I'd been offering Brittany to keep the peace. And then, inevitably, Brittany found it. It was late on a Thursday. I was in the garden trimming back my rose bushes when the screen door slammed hard enough to make me look up. She stood there on the porch, phone clutched in her hand, her face pale with something between fury and recognition. "This is about me," she said. Not a question. I wiped my gloves on my jeans. "If the shoe fits." Her mouth opened, then closed, like she was searching for the right insult. I could almost hear the gears turning, deciding whether to deny it, to attack, or to pretend she didn't care. But in her eyes, I saw it. She knew the world wasn't laughing with her anymore. The eviction notice's clock was ticking, and for the first week, they acted like it wasn't. Brittany still left her coffee mugs scattered on my counter. Carlos still dropped Maya off without knocking. But then came the second week. The panic week. Zillow searches left open on their laptop. Whispers behind a half-shut bedroom door. Brittany's phone calls with friends ending in sharp sighs. I didn't ask where they were looking. I didn't offer to help. I simply walked over to the guest house one quiet Thursday morning when I knew they'd both be out, and unlocked the door with my spare key. The kitchen smelled faintly of stale bread and vanilla candles. Dishes had been washed, but left with a greasy film. I opened the first cabinet, pulled out a stack of mismatched mugs, and wrapped them in newspaper. Box by box, I cleared their space. Not carelessly, but not sentimentally either. I didn't pause over photo frames or flip through mail. I packed with the precision of someone who'd had months, years, really, to think about boundaries. By the end of the day, 6 boxes lined the wall by the door, each labeled in black marker. Maya stayed with me during the transition. It wasn't part of the agreement. It just happened that way. She was easier here, napped better, smiled more. I kept her on my hip as I cooked dinner, her tiny fingers curling into the fabric of my sweater. One evening, Brittany came to pick her up. Her makeup was perfect, but her voice trembled. "Don't punish her, Linda." I shifted Maya onto my other hip. "I'm not punishing her. I'm protecting her from what you think love looks like." Brittany flinched but said nothing. She took Maya and left without looking back. On the final Friday, the movers arrived, 2 young men in matching shirts, their truck idling in the driveway. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and early spring rain. Carlos stood outside, hands on his hips, scanning the pile of taped boxes I'd stacked by the door. "You didn't have to?" "Yes," I said. I did. Inside, the guest house was almost bare now. Just furniture, which the movers handled with polite efficiency. The sound of tape ripping, furniture scraping, and muffled directions filled the air. Brittany hovered near the door, her eyes darting between me and the movers like she expected me to call the whole thing off. But I didn't. By noon, the truck door slammed shut. The new lease had been signed somewhere else. I didn't ask where, didn't care to. I stepped into the living room and picked up the last item, a plain, white envelope. I held it out to Brittany. She hesitated before taking it. Her nails clicked softly against the paper as she opened the flap. Inside was a single sheet. Balance due, $0. Respect owed, immeasurable. Her eyes flicked to mine, searching for some softening, some crack in the armor. She didn't find one. The guest house was empty now, stripped of their clutter, silent in a way that felt almost medicinal. But the eviction hadn't settled the account. Not the real one, because the real debt wasn't in dollars. It was in something Brittany had never valued and Carlos had forgotten existed. Time. Decades of it. My time, spent raising, cleaning, cooking, caring, hours I could never reclaim. So I decided to make sure the future belonged to someone who wouldn't waste it. 2 days after the movers left, I called Deshawn. "I want to change my will again," I said. "How big of a change?" he asked. "Big enough that the only person who should be nervous is Brittany." By that Friday, the papers were ready. I sat at my dining table, pen poised, while the rain ticked softly against the windows. The first adjustment. Maya's share of my estate went from 40% to 100%, payable when she turned 25. The second, a clause stating that Brittany Morales would have no authority, management, or claim over Maya's inheritance. No loopholes, no temporary custody of funds. The trust would be managed by an independent fiduciary until Maya came of age. And finally, I set up a separate educational fund, enough to take her from kindergarten through a graduate degree, should she want it. The air smelled faintly of Teresa's lemon hand cream when she arrived that afternoon to notarize everything. She read through each page, her brow lifting at the exclusions. "You're really locking her out, huh?" I nodded. "If she wants free, she can earn it like I did." Teresa stamped the final page with a firm thunk, the sound echoing in the quiet room. "Well, Linda," she said, "you just made sure the next 25 years won't belong to her." The handoff to Carlos came the next day. We met in the kitchen, the same spot where he'd once asked me to just let it go. I slid the folder across the counter. He opened it, skimmed the changes, and froze at the section naming Maya as sole heir. His eyes lingered on Brittany's legal exclusion. He didn't say a word. He closed the folder carefully, as if the weight of it might break if he wasn't gentle. Then he slipped it into his bag and left without a single question. That evening, Maya came over for dinner. She was wearing a tiny sweater with a yellow duck on the front, her hair in a little sprout ponytail. While I cleared the table, she toddled over and reached for the necklace around my neck. A simple gold chain Carlos had given me the year he graduated. Her fingers curled around it, tugging gently. I unclasped it without a word and dropped it into her palm. She grinned, closing her fist tight around it like she already knew it meant something. The first morning after they were gone, I woke to silence. Not the strained, teeth-gritting kind, but the kind that feels like a quilt over the whole house. No footsteps overhead. No slammed cupboard doors. No blender roaring at 7 a.m. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the whisper of wind through the maple outside my bedroom window. I made coffee slowly, without anyone needing me to hurry. The steam curled upward, carrying that deep, roasted scent into the still air. This was mine again. My time, my kitchen, my peace. A week later, my book club met at my dining table for the first time in months. The laughter was easy, unforced. No one had to tiptoe around the possibility of Brittany wandering through and making a snide comment about grandma hobbies. On Tuesdays, I started volunteering at the local daycare for 2 hours in the morning. I read Where the Wild Things Are to a circle of little faces, the smell of Play-Doh faint on their fingers. It was work, yes, but work I chose. That made all the difference. Maya began visiting every weekend, sleeping in the guest room I'd redecorated just for her. White curtains, a small bookshelf, a soft quilt in pastel yellow. She loved that room. I could tell by the way she'd run to it as soon as she arrived, dragging her stuffed bunny behind her. When she was here, we baked cookies, drew chalk cities on the driveway, and read until her eyes grew heavy. Sometimes I caught her glancing around as if checking that her parents weren't going to swoop in and whisk her away mid-game. I never asked about it. I just let her have the calm. One Sunday afternoon, Brittany tried to take a photo. The kind where everyone's smiling just enough to pass for happy. She held out her phone. "Come on, Linda, it's for the family album." I shook my head. I'm not interested in staged peace. Her smile thinned. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "I'm making it honest," I replied, and went back to helping Maya frost her cookie. Later that night, Carlos called. "She'll come around," he said, his voice low, like he didn't want Brittany to hear. "I already came," I told him. I just kept walking. There was a pause on the line, the kind where you can hear someone swallow a reply they know won't change anything. The following weekend, Maya arrived with her backpack and a folded piece of construction paper. She handed it to me before even taking off her shoes. The crayon lines were crooked, the spelling imperfect, but the message was clear. "Thank you for protecting me. Maya." The protecting was underlined 3 times in bright purple. A shaky heart sat in the corner. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't need to. The card from Maya stayed on my mantle for weeks. Not because it matched my decor. The paper was bent, the crayon smudged, but because it reminded me that I hadn't just drawn boundaries. I'd built something solid enough for her to stand on when she was ready. I wanted to make sure that foundation would outlast me. By the end of the month, I was back in Deshawn's office, papers spread across his mahogany desk. The air smelled faintly of leather and fresh toner. "Everything airtight?" I asked, tapping the top page with my finger. "Tighter than Fort Knox," he said, adjusting his glasses. "No amendments without 2 court approvals. No loopholes. This is irrevocable. The will now read like a manifesto. Maya as sole heir. Inheritance locked in trust. Until she turned 25, with an educational fund to cover every dream she could chase in between." Brittany's name appeared only once, in the clause explicitly barring her from any management or access to the estate. I signed the final line, my pen making a clean, deliberate stroke. It felt less like an ending than a keystone. But I wasn't done. The following week, I met with the director of a local nonprofit that provided legal aid and childcare stipends for single mothers. I'd seen too many women trapped by the same assumptions that had nearly swallowed me, that family duty meant free labor, that love meant sacrificing yourself without question. "This is in her name," I said, sliding a check across the table. "Maya Morales Fund for Mothers." The director's smile was small but warm, the kind that says they understand without needing more words. News travels quickly in a suburb, and soon my neighbors began to look at me differently. Not with pity, not with awkward avoidance, but with something closer to respect. "Good for you, Linda," the mail carrier said one morning. "About time someone called it what it is." "Hero," whispered the woman at the bakery, leaning over the counter as she slid me my sourdough loaf. I wasn't a hero. I was just someone who'd stopped saying yes when I meant no. Spring rolled in, and I spent more mornings in the garden than I had in years. The soil was rich, cool under my gloves, and the air carried that faint green smell of growing things. Sometimes, Maya's laughter would drift out from the guest room window where she played, the sound clear and bright as wind chimes. I'd pause, trowel in hand, and let it wash over me like sunlight. "They treated me like furniture," I told Teresa one afternoon as we sipped lemonade on the porch. "I turned into a foundation instead." She clinked her glass against mine. "And a sturdy one?" Carlos came alone one evening, no text beforehand. He stood in the doorway, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. "You did what you had to do," he said after a long pause. I searched his face for resentment, but found only a weary kind of understanding. Maybe even gratitude. I just nodded. "So did you, by not stopping me." He gave a short laugh, then glanced toward the living room where Maya's card still sat on the mantel. "She's going to be okay." "She already is," I said. That night, after he left, I sat at the kitchen table with a fresh cup of tea, the will tucked safely in the drawer beside me. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock and the faint rustle of leaves outside. The peace wasn't just in the silence. It was in knowing that I had chosen this life, rebuilt it, and locked it in place for the one person who deserved it most. I thought back to that baby shower, to the cupcake, to the laughter that wasn't mine, and I smiled. She called me the free babysitter. Now I charge what I'm worth, and I sleep like I earned it.